Welcome, folks, to Roll on the Adventure, where we build, revise, and play RPGs for you all. Today, we're going to be talking about the results of Splendor of the Stars, the Phantom Thief game to do with fashion in a Baroque setting. And so, everybody, let's roll the intro.
Roll on the adventure. Roll on the adventure.
Okay, it's getting better. Slowly.
I think we all decided to do a ballad for that one, so it kind of worked quite well.
I thought I'd point the phone at my dog and see if he'd contribute, but he just looked at me like, "Mummy, why?"
Anyway, so the first thing we sort of want to do is get a general thoughts from people on what they thought of the game.
Well, obviously, it's as we saw last time, it's exploitable by a corrupt GM. I mean,
Wow.
just throw that out there.
I mean, we did roll utterly terrible.
Yes, and I blame the corrupt GM.
I see. But like those kind of things I see happening when I play like digitally with people, and it's like, oh, Nathan, you rigged the dice roller bot, and I'm like, yeah, okay, fun jokes. But unless it happened like last time where we all rolled separately on our own machines, you only have y'all to blame, son.
Oh, we did.
I think the main mechanic I'm sort of thinking about is how you pick your stats and then you use your stats to approach things.
Mhm.
And it's weird because on one hand, you either do it so that people can use what stats they want and everyone uses the same stats, or you have a situation where, okay, you can only use certain stats so many times, but then you're forcing people to use a junk stat. So you get to a situation where either people are having rounds they're just throwing away because they don't value them as highly, or you've got situations where everyone's playing it safe and jack of all trading it. I think the main thing we've got to do is come up with a way that avoids that lets people come up with whatever builds they want while still, getting them to think outside the box and use their skills in different ways.
I see that.
That's definitely a good thing.
I think one way we could do that would be to increase the strong weak thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we chunk that right up, improve it quite considerably.
Okay.
So maybe, and obviously if this does have the potential to cause group fights, I know, but maybe have a limit on. So, for example, if there's already a suave player, maybe depending on the size of the group, maybe only allow one more suave player, or what I mean, or if there's a.
I would personally say that's down to the groups of players themselves. There shouldn't be a mechanical limit on that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You could possibly do some math based off the number of players of a given stat can only have a maximum of rank of X divided between everybody to stop having like 4 people all with suave 8 or something, so that it forces people to divvy up a bit.
You got a total of pool of flamboyance, for the party, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Possibly just do it as a guideline or something. Say, feel free to ignore this, but we find it's a bit more fun if.
I would definitely say keep it as a guideline, because if you limit it in that way, I feel it limits the choice players might feel they have over it.
Also, it might, also if you make it as more than a guideline, it might, and this is what I worried as I suggested it might foster a bit of resentment, because suddenly the first player to pick their character has all the power.
Or gets what they want.
I'm the suave character. I wanted to be the suave character. Fight. Yeah.
Although I would say, excuse me, that I enjoy heist games quite a bit. I play a lot of like Shadowrun and the kind of Ocean's 11-Z style setup where everybody has a dedicated role.
Definitely.
That's the point of the thing. And because that fits in thematically with this heist game, the idea that somebody is the coordination expert does not feel particularly wrong to me. What I will say is that I was entirely willing to have a garbage stat. I think in the game that I played, nobody actually spec'd into flamboyance, and I find that genuinely
That's
really
great,
funny.
yeah.
That's great. And happy accidents like that, I'm entirely okay with. But it did mean that you're right. I was very disinclined to use flamboyance whenever possible, and it meant that across the 3 sessions, I had combination A, which I think was like coordination and adaptability, combination B, which is suave and eye for detail, and then on the third one, I just went back to coordination and adaptability again, and never picked flamboyance because there was no reward for doing so. And there are definitely games where you get rewarded for fucking up. Sorry, you get rewarded for screwing up.
Well, pardon your French.
So maybe that's what this game needs, as the active decision to be suboptimal and get something good instead.
Some kind of not quite a full forward mechanic, but if you use your worst stats,
Yeah, like falling upwards.
If it helps like a different player, if me taking a bad footing gives bonuses to somebody else, or
like
if it gives us a
wingmanning
good position. Yeah, there we go. To foster a sense of teamwork a bit more, because you know, we all teamworked insofar as us all deciding that this particular thing was important, so we'd all put dice into it. But that's mechanical teamwork, not narrative. And
I did find a bit of teamwork with your character. I think it was, I can't remember. I think, so I was the moon. I found your character quite fun to riff off of, where, you know, your character was this boisterous and very handsome, probably rogue, and my character was just always rolling her eyes at him.
Oh gosh, that dynamic was so great. I loved that. I was gonna, we can talk about it a bit later, but I love the character creation part, separate to stats. I really enjoy that, but we'll get into that a bit later, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, no, definitely teamwork is something I think should be incorporated more into the game, because as it stood, when I was GMing mine, a lot of people would generally just go in opposite directions. Like one person would do one thing, one person would do the other thing, one person would do the third thing, which isn't bad. But at the same time, when it came up to doing teamwork, like some of the very later rounds when people decide to both do the same thing, there wasn't much of a either a mechanic or an impetus for people to work together.
No, I mean, when I remember we were pitching that guy who didn't like my character because she wasn't terribly direct, and we were both pitching them with similar skills, but it was like 2 different conversations happening to the same person at the same time.
Rather than you both talking to this person together. Sure.
Yeah. I think maybe one way to stop that is to not allow us 2 targets. And also, I think that could help with the stats thing, because people are only allowed 1 per round. They can get more use out of them. But also, if you only give us 1 target, that means we are definitely only in this one place, and we can really either throw our all into it, or at the very least, have us say, if you do have us 2 targets, have us explain how our character is combining them. Don't let us. Oh, like remember when I had one round where my plan was I got along with the gamblers by, you know, joining in with them, and I was doing so in a way to attract someone else's attention. Now that is a role playing where I'm doing one thing, but it affects 2 groups. And I think that's what you should enforce if you keep the 2 things. Basically saying how, with one action, you affect 2 people. Don't let them just say, I use charisma. Well, yeah, charisma on this and smarts on this. Like, no, how?
A suggestion, actually, to build on top of that is that if you're getting 2 options, maybe you pick one where you're a lead and one where you're an assist.
Yeah, I tried to enforce that in my game as well by saying, generally the person who put the most into it would be the lead in that situation, and the other would be the support. So in the situation where I believe you were talking to the challenger, and he didn't like you because you weren't being direct about it, but he liked Chris's character because they were being quite direct. In that case, it didn't exactly work ideally, but that's kind of the train you'd want to go along with, you leading something and then someone else supporting you, or the other way around. It's just how to get that to work, because this is quite different to a usual RPG scenario where that flows a lot more easily.
I think we tended to end up doing it a bit like that, just due to naturally I've just done a talky bit. I'm helping somebody else out. I'm going to let them do a
Yeah.
talky bit rather.
Mhm.
But yeah, it might
Yeah.
again be easier if it was more of an explicit thing rather
Yeah, to
than
codify it would help
tendency.
it become more
Yeah.
naturally. I agree. I
Yeah.
will say that the stats themselves, like the names of them and the descriptions of what they mean, is really nice. I recently came across a post on the RPG design Reddit. Somebody was talking about how a thesaurus won't win you rewards, as in don't rename all the kind of established terms if that makes it harder to understand. Your uniqueness doesn't make for clarity. But I think under this specific circumstance, talking about stuff like flamboyance and suave, well, both of those are charismatic things, but this is a fashion RPG, so being charismatic is innate. So breaking it down into those finer parts is valuable and refreshing, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
when you've only got about 5 stats, it's not too bad. It's when you'll start somebody's renaming dex, initiative, strength, like the whole kit and caboodle, and you're just having to mentally translate it in your head to normal terms that it gets
if you're writing a
irritating.
fantasy heartbreaker, let's not rewrite. Let's not change those.
Yeah, there's few enough terms in this. I don't think it's too bad.
Yeah.
I'd hate to play like Apocalypse World with the stats from Monster Hearts, that kind of thing. They're different games, they need different stats, even if some of them kind of do the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know. The mechanic I probably found the most clunky was the idea that you couldn't use the same stats twice. And again, this was because
Same 2 stats twice, or the same stat more than twice in a row.
more than twice in the game, yeah.
Twice in a row it was.
Yeah. So I found that a bit clunky just because, especially in my game, there were just times where in fairly important scenarios, you guys were throwing fairly low numbers like 4s and 5s, whereas in the slightly less important scenarios, you guys were throwing 8s and 9s.
Yeah, but we were trying to work out what was important.
I suppose, and in that way, that is a fairly interesting thing for the GM to do. And I think in both my game and in your game, Purple, it was interesting how we tried to draw attention to what was the big important thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's that in my head. I'd always conceived that as kind of a bit of the skill of the game. Was going to be working out the logic behind what stat's going to be weak and strong, and the logic of what's going to have the most points in it.
Yeah, I personally think I know we deleted the reroll mechanic because it wasn't being used in the first game, but in the second game, it honestly would have been very useful.
I don't know.
I kind of think we should put it back in because there are going to be games where you roll well and don't remember it, and there's going to be some games where you roll crap and you really want it.
Oh, the trump card mechanic, not the.
Yes.
I thought you meant the replan mechanic for a second. Then.
No, the trump card mechanic.
Yeah, because on the other one, like we only found out like a couple of weak stats, so we wouldn't have used the replan mechanic. I think that was definitely too much complexity.
Yeah, replanning, I think, is a different thing entirely because I didn't even think you used it in my game at all, and you found a lot of weak and strongs there.
I know we only found a couple of weeks.
Yeah, true. A lot of the weeks were eye for detail, and you guys just didn't spec into it.
That's the way that goes, right? Though, I guess that's the weird gamble thing. Is that something that can be kind of like corrected over time? Because you, as the GM, you kind of write the scenarios and the weaknesses in advance, and I guess separately to knowing what the players are good and bad at.
I mean, you could possibly make there a mechanic with limited use where the players can switch the strengths and weaknesses of an opponent. And so, say if you know the strong stat, maybe you can use something like a trump card, but with a different name, and say, okay, according to this, these two things switch for the round. So now you have their weak stat. Yeah. Again, one of these things I want to talk about is the idea of having each major arcana for the players having a separate ability. Because ideally, I would love to do that. But because of time and various other things, I wasn't able to write it.
Yeah. Like, I think for the purposes of this game, it was a case of writing the table is going to take a lot of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do like the idea. Maybe should have the stat-based powers, because the things like the eye for detail and stuff like that, being able to pick one was nice.
Mm.
And the eye for detail power, it was really handy in a few places.
Mm-hmm.
So on the point of powers, were there any powers we thought weren't very good? Basically, like either underutilized, like Eye for Detail, that was a good power. I agree. It wasn't used very much in the second game because I don't think anyone had it.
No, I intentionally didn't take it, so I wanted to try
just to see what
I
it would be like.
forgot what power I took. I think for me, I was kind of put off by the one per event thing. I loved the Suave power in the first round, and you kind of nerfed it for the second. Why? Why would you do that to me? Why?
As in not being able to roll failures, and I guess, but
we didn't nerf it. It was stronger.
You would inevitably, because of the idea of not being able to roll the same stat twice. That even if you could use Suave repeatedly, Suave's power repeatedly, you'd still be only really forced to do it occasionally, just because the way the game works. I do agree that the Eye for Detail power, which, just to reiterate for those who don't remember, once per event may ask for information on a complication, which is generally information is always power. And I guess I picked Adaptability's power. Pick one stat, it is never weak for you this game, and that would be reasonable. Except it just happened to not come up, or at least not verbally. Although I think this is an interesting like GM teaching moment. If this is not too much of an aside, but like the difference between running a scenario that's pre-written, ignoring who is playing, and writing scenarios specifically spec'd for the people who are playing, and being able to play on their strengths and weaknesses directly in the content that's going on. This game actually allows for that quite well if player generation, because players don't have that many moving parts, and it's very clear what they are good and what they are bad at. So it's not unreasonable, therefore, for the GM setting strengths and weaknesses and the bits and pieces that are meaningful to directly set up a space where, actually, yes, this would benefit or harm specific members of my team at different times, so they can feel a bit more involved and that their powers and skill set mean things.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, well, there definitely is room for it, because part of the game is that the person who is DMing only knows certain things they can use, like their location, their sovereign, their treasure, at the start of the game. So there's no way you can pre-write something. Like, I had a vague idea of using an arena and a combat thing, and I was lucky that the things I was given, I could do that. But otherwise, I would have had to have improved. And again, that's different. Like, Purple found that to be the best thing. Like, he could, you could make it up on the fly, essentially. Whereas I needed 10 minutes to sort it out.
I mean, I did take like 5-10 minutes.
But that's fine. That's to be expected.
But I think in my case, I tended to stat the complications out fairly evenly. So there would always be like a couple things with Eye for Detail as its weakness, as its strength. And basically, I made it so it was more of an even thing, rather than everyone is weak to this thing, or most of them are strong to this thing. Because I wanted the idea to be that if you weren't good at one opponent, you could be very good at another.
Yeah.
So I tended to stat things like one strong thing is weak to this thing, one slightly weak asset is weak to this thing. It's up to you to then find out who's the stronger of the two, and then focus your efforts into that.
That's basically how I went at it.
I do wonder if there is, I guess it's a lot of work for the GM to bear, but in the kind of like openings of the scene where the GM kind of explains what moving parts are in the scene, if there's some way in the description of such to give a hint or just kind of like an aside note being like, oh, as a GM, when you're introducing like moving part X, remember that if they're weak to adaptability, to kind of highlight that in a way of, so you're giving us a clue, because it felt entirely like guesswork as to what was good and what was not, unless you had eye for detail.
Yeah.
In the actual notes, it says drop hints as to the nature and strength of the various complications.
I think
I
I
mean-
took nature of strength as being their power value as opposed to their
Yeah.
strengths and weaknesses.
More so, but like I did try get them across. It's just a little bit tricky without just giving it away.
Oh no, that's fair. I'm dumb, so I probably just didn't pick up on the hints of it.
Also, to be fair, with the fine grainness of the stats, it's kind of difficult to do it in certain situations.
Yeah.
Some things like weak against suave, it doesn't immediately leap to mind of what that would be described as an example.
He
Yeah.
blushes very easily.
So like when I did weak to suave,
Yeah.
which the challenger was weak to suave, as was the disgraced noble. The idea was that if someone is not clothed in very grand clothing or is disgraced, they are generally weak to suave. Like that was my thought behind that.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Because you
And then if someone is big and dumb and powerful, like the champion, they were usually weak to eye for detail.
Sure, I can see that.
just from an
Oh god, the strong weak thing.
Yeah, we got so confused over that because I
That's
defined
just-
it as weak against strong too.
Mm-hmm.
And other people are like,
Oh,
oh, this thing
that
is strong
confused
against it and this thing is weak against it.
It explicitly says write it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer the other way around.
Yeah, I found myself alternating. That's why I was like, I'm just gonna put one.
Maybe I guess if it's resistant vulnerable, because then it's entirely the framing of that specifies what's being done to it.
I would actually agree with that more because it's more explicit on what reading that is.
I mean, that's the problem. I had a lot of trouble with that wording. And I think everyone else did as well. So obviously it needs changing.
Can someone remind me what the pick one stat, it is never weak for you, this game means?
So at some point, you can pick one of your stats. It never counts as weak when you use it.
Meaning that I could therefore go into a circumstance where I go into something with like coordination, and then the GM says, this character is it finds coordination attacks weak, or rather it's resistant to coordination with the new terminology. And I'd be like, I've got the power of this, and I'm going to say that I can never be found resistant to coordination or something. I guess that's how I read it anyway.
Yeah.
Although I was a nerd and decided to like dictate internally that it would be coordination immediately, and then just kind of keep that as a thing. Which is not optimal play, Nathan Blades. You're not being a metagamer, but it just felt like thematically he would be just really good at that, even in the face of all else.
I'm wondering then, considering how we're thinking of replanning, because replanning I think is the mechanic we're currently most iffy about.
We got rid of it, so
I would wonder if we would want to replace that with the switch resistant and those two stats around. Replace that power
for one thing. Like but it lasts the whole game, is what I'm thinking.
Okay, it's a permanent change, but you only get like one. Sure.
Yeah. Once per game, switch what would you say, resistant and vulnerable switch.
Yeah.
And that maintains for the whole game.
Yeah, I like that because it's a permanent change.
It gives you weight behind collectively making that decision. Because I would assume that decision has to be made unanimously, otherwise it would be grim.
Well, presumably the player would talk to the other players because we've currently been doing talking as an out of character action.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, we already buffed Suave because it now, instead of it just counting on your Suave dice, it counts on
anyone's Suave dice. Ooh, that's interesting.
No, it's like the Flamboyant, it's one roll per event.
Sure.
So basically you can go, we're not going to roll any ones on this one roll per event.
All right.
But
That's-
what did people think about powers, like power ratings, and how that worked?
Okay. I think mine worked really well. It came down pretty close. You rolled largely average,
Mm,
and it worked out pretty well. However, you didn't go over the Void Mother's power by a lot.
Oh yeah, we just narrowly clinched it, right?
Not narrowly. You were a few over, but you
Mm.
weren't like loads over.
Yeah,
Which, sure.
What value did you give to the treasure in the end? Was it 12?
me.
Yeah.
I think I gave it because I didn't put the value on the treasure itself. I put the value on the
Oh yeah,
sovereign.
the sovereign.
And I gave it 10.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I thought it's 12, sorry. Yeah.
So I gave it 10 as its like value because I thought that was a good power. That was a good setting to have.
Mhm.
And really, when I went across giving the power ratings to the rest of the complications, the lowest was 5. And a couple people had that, like the protester had
Yeah.
5, and you noticed that fairly quickly. Like they were fairly low.
The gamblers had 5, 6.
Yeah, the gamblers had 5 or 6. The challenger had 7, and a couple of other people had 7 as
The
well.
challenger had 7.
Yeah, so the challenger
Hmm.
had a like medium value.
Mhm.
And then the cheaters and the champion had, I think, 10 and 15 respectively. And you
Hmm.
just rolled really badly every time you went against the cheaters, so you just never really decreased.
We only got 6 off them.
Yeah, it's also because every time you rolled failures, because as the DM, your job is to use those failures to make things more difficult.
Mm.
I basically just always made the cheaters more difficult because you always rolled bad on it anyway.
We got 13. We rolled 13 total successes on the challenger, though.
Yeah, the challenger you basically wiped, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And the champion you wiped at the end.
Yeah.
And then you wiped a lot of the things that would have caused you massive issues in the last
Yeah.
turn, which is very good. And you were very close to winning that heist. You rolled an 8, and again, it was like only 10 or something.
And it was a terrible roll. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think even right till the end, I was like, this doesn't look good, but I think we can make it.
We might be able to pull it off.
Mm.
You made quite a good recovery in the last round. It just wasn't wasn't enough.
Just wasn't enough, yeah.
Which I think is
That's
quite a
okay.
good thing to have because it's better.
Narrow
to
losses sound
accumulate
cool, right?
that. Yeah, narrow losses
Yeah.
is better than huge win.
This
Mhm.
is why I'm not sure about the trump card rerolls.
I would
Hmm.
say keep the trump card as its ruling was written, which was to re-roll except in the last round.
What was it? It was only against the treasure or sovereign.
Yeah, so to not re-roll against those was, I think, the idea.
Yeah.
Because I remember suggesting, should we have the trump card come in now? Because you guys erased it at the start of the game, but at that point in the game, you were doing so badly. I was like, okay, I kind of want to put this in. So
Not
I think
to rub
keep
it in or anything, but
no, but I think it would help, especially in the round before the end, because by that point, I think you guys had already twigged you weren't doing very well, and that's the time where I think a lot of people would use it in the third round.
I don't think you should have one each, though.
Oh no, I think it should be like one team trump card.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty good. Oh, I've got an idea.
Mhm.
So you know when we do the cards at the beginning, the major arcana. How about we deal an extra card, and the first card that gets picked is like a theme card for the game.
Okay.
And it's like the team's sort of MO card.
To build in the reason why, or maybe the approach and context. Sure.
A part of me thinks that should be an optional rule because I did like the idea that everyone got their cards and then had to make an idea as opposed to having an idea and then having to make everything else fit it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't have to do much with it. I mean, you can just have it there and you can just refer back to it.
That's why I think it should be an optional rule.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we should always have the card there if we're going to use it at all because it's your trump card. But
I guess to kind of, if we're talking about the kind of like major arcana Taro bits again. Let's get into the early character design parts, because I think across the entire thing, and maybe it's mean to say, but the bit I enjoyed the most was making the characters thematically / aesthetically from the card draw. That was my favorite part, not the actual heist. But I know I'm mean. I'm horrible.
To be fair,
person.
it was really fun.
Yeah,
I did enjoy that.
Yeah.
No, that was fucking cool, and I guess that might lean into the idea of if this game was to be expanded, giving each major arcana a different power. I think would actually work quite well, because then that is another way of dragging the thematic choices that you've made from the card at the beginning into the game proper.
I think one that would be good there is that if we made all the stat powers once per event, and made all the card powers once per game.
Yeah, which I think is what we sort of wanted. Like,
then we
because
probably wouldn't need the trump card at that stage.
Well, I think maybe keeping in the trump card, because I like now that we have 3 different one-use powers at our disposal. We've got the ability to switch to resistances and vulnerabilities. That's a once per game. We've got the trump power as a once per game. And then we have our individual, like, spy thief gimmicks once per game. And they feel
only going to be coordination people that get the once per game thing, though.
But they just feel kind of like your thieves' secret tools. To give it some theming. Like, these are the gadgets and Deus Ex Machinas and bull crap flashbacks. I saved myself there. Whoops.
I mean, 'cause...
the flashbacks that you've made to make the heist go your way, like, because they're just once per game powers. There's power in using them, but also it feels dramatically / thematically appropriate. I like that.
I would agree with that, especially because a lot of what I brought to the table here in terms of my thought process was Persona 5. And one of the things I really enjoy about
complaining, but I can
tell. One of the things I really enjoy about Persona 5 is how differentiated each arcana is from each other, apart from a paint job. And currently, as the game stands, there is differentiation by how you give your people stats and things, but there isn't anything beyond that in a paint job. And I think if you wanted this to appeal to more people and be even pop even more than it does now, it would be to give each major arcana their own separate power. Obviously, the issue with that would be balancing.
My other issue there is that I'd rather not people be picking their arcana because it's got a cool mechanical power. I'd like them to pick it because it's cool. They've got a cool character idea. It's like, going into D&D and just having a guy who's playing Warlock, not because it makes any sense whatsoever. It's
because
just
it's mechanically broken, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, you can't police how a player thinks. And some players, using the D&D example, some players just are power players. They will pick something because it's the best possible build. And you also get players who really like doing something thematic, or you like people to like doing dumb combinations. I don't think a game should ever be built to try and police those sort of players. Give incentives, obviously, but don't try and police them, because that just limits how engaging your game is going to be to a wide range of people. And I personally believe choice in the choices that the players have is the primary aim of an RPG.
Maybe these powers aren't necessarily ones that affect your dice, but affect the story. Because another thing I was going to go and raise was there was, or at least in our game, surprisingly little RP unless I personally push for it.
There wasn't a huge amount, to be honest.
And I was like, oh man, I want to kind of like play in the space a bit more sometimes. And I managed to get that with the kind of like flirty sword fighting with the champion of the kingship, and that was a fun time. But maybe the powers are like, for example, since this is kind of like sci-fi space future-y, if I pulled the moon, it's like you have seen into the dreams of one person, who is it? And then you can spend that in the game, and then
you can answer that question.
Yeah, in the moment. So rather than it necessarily affecting your dice rolls, it can push the story in a way, because there's definitely aside from the final roll that you do to see whether you get the prize or not, you can divert how scene 2 and scene 3 play out pretty wildly by the stuff you do. So that would definitely give players a bit more agency in how the second and third scenes play out, based on whether you use your own tarot cards special narrative power. Mechanical.
It would definitely be something to think about if we ever wanted to expand this game, how that would work, because I do like the idea of them being RP aids. I don't know. This game is a very weird one to me, because to me it is neither a board game nor is it an RPG. It is a weird and sort of clunky mix of the two of them.
If I'd have been stood in a room with you, we'd have cleared a space and we'd have had like actual standing scenes.
Yeah. Admittedly, like, I have to think of this as an online experience because that's how we're playing it, and that's how if this was a thing a lot of people played, that's how a lot of people would probably end up playing it.
I would have pitched it 3 hours as well.
Jesus Christ, this thing as a LARP would be astounding.
Oh, as a freeform.
You just want everyone to dress up.
I could pitch this as a 3-hour LARP,
Yeah, no, we've got a proper ballroom available and everybody's coming in their finery to steal some shit. Yes, absolutely.
I don't know, it's definitely an odd combination. I would love to have more of an RP focus in this game.
Yeah.
But that's kind of blocked.
Funny, I was going the other way. I was going to say board gamey.
That's the thing. Like, the RP itself is blocked by the board game mechanics, and the fact you can't just go everywhere and anywhere like you could in a normal scene. You have to go to that particular place you chose.
You go a lot of places. You just got to get so many dice to spend.
True, but then the board game element is blocked by the RP element. So in some ways, it uses both okay, but it doesn't use the maximum strength of either.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Because I remember when we were making the game, I tried to push it more in the board game direction.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And I think, I'm not going to say it was because I knew that would be an issue, but I think it's because when I thought of it, especially in terms of the tarot cards having certain abilities, I thought of it as a board gaming thing as opposed to a RP thing, because that it becomes weird when you try and do that.
I will say I don't actually dislike the whole there are specific points in this space to interact with, because I think that actually focuses the RP in a way, because there's something that all kind of very freeform RPGs have, depending on the nature of the people that you play with, because obviously that's always a factor. But the availability and ability to faff about, where if this was a if we were having a ballroom scene in a generic RPG and let your players kind of interact with anything and everything, there'd be a lot of dilly-dallying between what they might think are the points of interest in the room, then not finding that there's actually anything that's actually interesting there, depending, and then just kind of batting around until they found something to glom onto. But with the ability to kind of highlight, these are the 3 super interesting things here, which do you want to explore, kind of focuses things in a little, and I like that for speed. But then I'm a speed RPer. I always like getting shit. I always like getting stuff done. Sorry.
I'm much more of an explorer when it comes to my games. I like to have someone describe what the area looks like to me, and then I will go poke around every other corner of the room.
Yeah.
We are mortal enemies.
We are.
Well, like Nathan says, a lot of the more focused mini RPGs, by nature of being so much smaller and more focused, are going to have a far smaller list of shiny things to interact with, because they don't have random rules for how much you can carry, how important random NPCs are. It's literally, this is a game where, Gumshoe, where the kind of main system is literally, if there's a shiny thing, in the scene, you automatically pick up on that as long as you have the appropriate skill.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
there's no
love
kind
that.
of. It works really well for Gumshoe. It's just a very different mental
Style.
point of view than the whole kind of you need to roll investigation or you need to roll ... to see if you find anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally fair. I probably just don't.
Oh no, it is very. There's nothing wrong with either. It is just a very different approach, which can take a bit of getting used to.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's true.
definitely the fact it's a different approach is the game is interesting if nothing else. I found it was quite an interesting learning experience, not only to make it but to play it
Mm-hmm.
and see how people would play this sort of game as opposed to a board game or an RPG, which I've played and run both, and they're very different styles to this, which is a hybrid of them.
Mm-hmm. The real splendor were the friends we made along the way.
Yes.
And the clothing we wore.
Yes. Oh, favorite outfits that everybody had. I loved the spooky ass nun in Vanta Black. Oh, that was so cool. My favorite.
I should have done more with that, but yes, that was just. I was just playing a bit on
I
the
enjoyed that.
Benny Gesserit from June,
Mm-hmm.
or how you pronounce it.
I could see that.
I quite like the sword brandishing one. I quite like yours.
Oh,
Yes.
Dirk
Where there
von
were no obvious swords
Swordface.
until suddenly swords everywhere.
I quite enjoyed that one, but then again, I have a weakness for the musketeer type.
Oh no, so do I. It's why I was very happy to get Justice.
I mean, I really enjoyed doing mine for the second game.
Mhm.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, basically, the outfit I put the most thought into was the second one, and that was the Roman outfit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because, I didn't want to make it like a Nan Summers sexy Roman, but I wanted to kind of take my inspiration was, as I said in the RP itself, Ross Pitt? What's the name of the fellow from Gladiator?
Russell Crowe.
That's it, Russell Crowe. His outfit, where he's at the start of Gladiator, he's got his big fur cloak on,
Mhm.
and I thought, how can I make that an evening gown?
Nice.
I see. There's nothing wrong with sexy Greco-Roman. I love Xerxes.
Oh no, it's not. Well, yes, but I wanted to make it sort of sexy in an adult, sort of in a way that you could actually wear out and about, as
Mhm.
opposed to
A day to night look. Yes.
Mine was completely
You go from the
impractical.
office, from your Greco-Roman office, to the Greco-Roman nightclub.
with my Greco-Roman oiled up wrestlers.
Mm-hmm.
So then, as a sort of summary of what we think we'd want to change, dumping the replanning mechanic seems to be something we agree on.
So, yeah, the game worked well without it in the second playtest.
Okay, and then that would be replacing it with the switch vulnerability and resistance, in which
For the
case,
power,
yes.
yes.
And that would also become the wording of weak and strong.
Yeah, resistant and vulnerable.
Mhm.
Oh god, thank you so much for that, Nathan, because that was winding me up.
It's all good.
And then there would be adding back in the trump card as a team once per game thing,
Yeah.
not in the last round.
Talking of that,
Mhm.
I think what would be really nice is, when we're picking those from the tarot cards,
Mm.
if the first one, the team one, gets picked and put face down, the GM doesn't get to see it until the players pull it.
Okay.
I wonder what point would that serve?
It'd just be fun.
Just when the GM goes, what the hell? God damn it.
There is always something a little amusing in the fact that it's something the players know, but the GM doesn't, because it feels like they're getting one up over the GM. I understand that.
The whole idea is that it's a surprise that throws the party out.
I kind of really like the idea that would be the trump card, and literally when they say we are using the trump card, they flip it over and then have to describe based on that card what their trump takes the form
yeah,
of.
that's pretty funny. I like that.
It's like, we rolled the moon. Well, Majora's Mask is a thing now. Boom.
It feels very Cowboy Bebop in that they're competent, but they're always surprised at what they have to go through to get the things to do the thing.
I mean,
what do you mean this is the only gadget we have left?
Should the players get to see it as well?
Grandpa's deck has no pathetic cards, GM, but it does have this.
Death. Oh no. Oh no.
So I like that idea as being like the physical representation of the trump card is
Yeah.
that card that no one sees, and then they flip it over and they're like, oh.
Oh, so it's hidden from the players as well. I wasn't sure if it was just hidden from the GM.
No,
I
that's
like the
sick,
idea that it's
actually,
hidden and then
yeah.
everyone has to describe like how that trump card helps.
No, that's a really good insight.
So is there anything else anyone thinks we would change?
One thing we think should address. Remind me, what's the name of the stat where you know the competencies?
Eye for detail.
Eye for detail.
Yeah. Now, should everyone know that? And I'm wondering if maybe that should be kept private. I mean, obviously, we can really do that. But if that means if one player has eye for detail, everyone has eye for detail.
Yeah.
And, I mean, on the one hand, that does save multiple people taking the same talents. On the other hand, is that maybe giving the team too much information and making it a bit too meta?
I would disagree with that. I personally think I treat having eye for detail as if someone had a very high perception. Like you see there is a trap. You don't need to tell everyone there's a trap, but there's a trap and you can see it. To me, it feels unfriendly if that person wasn't able to say, this is the weakness or strength of the opponent. Because again, we're trying to encourage teamwork, not individual competence.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying should that
school.
not be their choices, and should that not be a note made privately to them, which they can then, you see what I mean, rather than just automatically.
I mean, if your group really wants to do that, then
give it a try. But I personally think is a bit of I wouldn't want my game to be ruined for all of my players because one player decided to be a dick.
Yeah.
The problem with trying to keep it private is then basically going to consist of the player trying to describe it with varying degrees of subtlety of, maybe that person doesn't seem to like.
No, to be fair, if they want to tell them, they'll just tell them.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that the player has to keep it private. I'm just saying maybe the GM doesn't say it out loud, and you know what I mean?
I mean, technically, it doesn't specify.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I'm just wondering if we're making it too easy for people who aren't the player to benefit from it, or maybe the player with eye for detail goes last.
To be honest, it makes the team more likely to get the treasure.
Yeah. I again, because one of the precepts of this game is teamwork. Yes, in a way, it makes it because obviously everyone else in that round didn't have to use eye for detail, and they got to do their other things. But this player had to use eye for detail.
But that is
The
a
point
kind
is
of
that's-
teamwork sacrifice. That's the point, right?
Yeah, like they used their round to make it better for not only them in future rounds, but everyone in this round. And that's they are useful because they have done that.
Right.
If this was a different game where the allyship of the players wasn't so well established as being the point, if these were all separate thieves racing for the same treasure, then keeping information separate from them makes sense. Because there's a genuine reason as to why you wouldn't want to tell other people, but because you're all trying to work together to steal this thing, and statistically, unless you work together, you can't steal the thing.
No.
Yeah.
It doesn't make much sense to keep that information hidden. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah, because in both games, it was fairly difficult for people to figure out what the weaknesses and strengths of people were anyway, and so removing a way for them to discover those feels like it just makes the game arbitrarily more difficult for no reason.
Yeah, we're not removing it, but it
would be changing it to make it private, which you could consider as removing it because you're making it less useful.
Well, it's limiting. It's technically still there, but it is significantly less useful.
So that's my thoughts on it. But I definitely agree. If there was a PvP mechanic, that would be a very cool thing to have, that you have more knowledge than everyone else does. But because this is a very cooperative game, it doesn't exactly fit in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I did skip out on you lot at the end of the last game, but that was just purely a narrative choice and had no mechanical effect.
Yeah, by that point, the game was basically over.
Yeah.
It was,
And
yeah.
up until that point, it was
Wrapping up.
always we're gonna work together for me. So
Okay, so if that is sort of all for now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that and putting in the narrative powers for each arcana is a thing. I think
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that
new
that would
version
be
should
like
include.
if we did an expansion or
Yeah.
revisited this, then yeah, we would certainly do that.
yeah, I'm thinking let's keep the stats. Do it this way. It's the because to be honest, the don't use the same two twice. Don't use like the same stat more than twice in a row. Like I didn't have to use my worst stat at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And had a load of things. Like if I'd have started differently, then I could have been more flexible and taken advantage of like vulnerable vulnerable opponents.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's perfect. I think we're fine keeping that if we increase how much vulnerable does.
Sure. Oh yeah, that was I guess one of the things to add to the docket is buffing
Yeah.
vulnerabilities and weaknesses.
So-
Vulnerabilities and resistances, sorry.
I'm thinking. What do you think? Like 4 dice?
I'm
3?
bad at that kind of math, so I couldn't say. But
Yeah, as am I. I'm not very good at that sort of
maths nerds, go work it out for us and tell us on Twitter what the right thing to do is.
I think it's about 3.5.
thing.
Great.
I'm not putting in 3.5 dice. So let's go for 4.
Mm-hmm. Oh, a small thing I wanted to raise actually relating to that. How married are we to D10s as a thing? Because it worked out okay us rolling that number of D10s.
I
for,
personally quite like the D10s, because obviously if you use, for instance, D6s, the chances become a lot different.
Yes.
Possibly using D8s might be a thing.
I guess the reason why I bring it up is because who has that many D10s? The way that we managed to kind of work this through was by using dice roller apps, and that's fine. And especially since we've been for Roll on the Adventure playing stuff through Discord and Dicebox exist, then yeah, you can roll 20 D10s and have that not be unreasonable. But in the kind of general availability to play in multiple contexts, circumstances where you roll 24 D10 feels unreasonable. But yes, I do understand that changing the probability is a thing if you change it to different types of dice.
Yeah, that's the one thing about. I mean, my first thought was maybe group up to D20s, but the problem with that is that suddenly your chance of rolling a 1 becomes lower. I mean, the only way you could work around that was if using D20s, 1s or 2s become.
Yeah, at which point you could, if you wanted to have a catch-all, you could say for various types of die, these are the rules for using these type of die. Using D20s has the same problem as using D10s. Who has that many D20s?
I'd argue that like players tend to have you're more likely to have a lot of D10s, not like 20 odd D10s, than you are to have 20 D20.
Yeah, you're more likely.
Well, yeah, but surely if you use the D20, the point is that you halve the number you needed. I mean,
we could just halve all the dice pool sizes and keep the same number of dice.
It depends how wedded we are to the particular spread of stats, because obviously with a D10, it's 1 in 10 of getting a 1, 1 in 10 of getting a 10, and then 7, 8, or 9 is a regular success.
The other consideration is that there are multiple dice games that require up to sort of 10 D10. And it's only one player rolling at once. So if 3 players put their stat in, then they literally pick up their dice and add them to the pile.
Oh yeah, that's
I guess it is easier to rely on people having their own sets of 10 D10. That's true.
Also, one thing, would we, if we were really playing this, we're all together with the table, wouldn't we all do our own roles? Like, I thought the reason we assigned roles to people was because it was just easier to get one person to do everything. But
I think part of the fun of it, honestly, it's like when you do wargaming
and roll a whole bunch of D6 to do it.
Yeah, like a big part of the fun of wargaming is taking those 20, whatever dice you're using and rolling all of them at the same time. that's one of the fun things about the game. And yeah, you could totally split it out so everyone that rolled their particular dice rolled their particular dice.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you need to codify that in any way. That's just up to preference.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in terms of dice that you might want to use, if you weren't going to use D10s, the one I would probably use would be D6s. Obviously,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of D6s. You can get like
They're
the
the most
tiny
common, yeah.
D6s.
Mm-hmm.
Get them in packs of 36.
And in obviously, then you might have to jig some rules around because no matter which dice you chose to use that wasn't a D10, you would have to change the rules of the game somehow.
To
Because,
fit
for instance,
mathematically, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, because one of the abilities is that 9s and 10s explode. Well, now if you have a D6, would you make it 5s and 6s explode? And in
Mm.
which
Which is
case things become
incredibly
substantially
swingy.
easier.
Mm-hmm.
That's, 1 in 3-ish rather.
So you'd have to make a bunch of essentially errata rules saying, in case of using these dies, this happens, this changes. And I think that makes it a bit too complicated.
Fair enough.
I'd rather not offer all the options, to be honest.
Yeah, I would just offer D10s.
A lot of
Okay.
extra.
Okay.
I mean,
I can
maybe
see-
I'm spoiled because I game night every Sunday at a place where it's just got a box full of every kind of dice. So I've had to roll that many D10s before. And
Yeah, I've got about 40 odd.
my only problem has always been finding the space to physically roll them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's definitely a good thing to bring up, Nathan, as to how that would work. But I think because we've used die as such a central mechanic in this game, it would
Changing the
involve way
numbers
too
of that
many
would be,
changes.
yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, like 6s would just be incredibly swingy.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have, because the thing is though, the one, like, you'd be rolling almost twice as many ones, which means your numbers go up a lot and change around. You no longer know quite where things are.
So here's a question. I'm curious. So between the two games, obviously the first game and the small test we did when we originally created the rules were very, very heavily Baroque inspired. And my second game was very not in a lot of ways. Like it was sci-fi Roman.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how specific we still want to make the setting, because I just love the idea of heists with fashion thieves without having to have a setting.
I'd keep the sci-fi.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly vague. I mean, essentially, all it boils down to it's sci-fi. You're doing this to piss off the nobility. That's quite open.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm wondering, the only word I would have a problem with them is Baroque.
I do like the conceit of the theme being sci-fi plus period piece, and then keeping the period open. I dig that.
Yeah, I think we could have like period as opposed to Baroque.
Or maybe replace Baroque with corrupts.
Yeah, or some other thing that makes it more open.
Decadent.
Yeah, decadent. I think corrupt or decadent, and I think with corrupt you also have the players' sympathies immediately. Like they know why we want to take them down because they're corrupt. They deserve it.
Personally, it doesn't have that air of here's a load of cool big stuff going on. Corrupt is you could play it like dirty and grimy, and that's really not what the game's built around.
No, I think so. The decadence from that point might be better, yeah, because that does. Because I won't lie, I'd never heard the word Baroque before you brought it up.
Yeah,
I don't know how.
I mean, to be honest, the only places the actual like this has to be like science fiction, like the whole Baroque sci-fi nobility thing, only comes up in the initial text description, like the tagline and the description and the examples.
I would personally say, while that is the case, and yes, it doesn't. So it's not like it's not plastered everywhere, and so there is room for maneuver. The fact it is in the tagline is important because if I'm a new player and wanted to try this thing, and I'm like, oh, this is a thing called Splendor of the Stars. That sounds cool, and then I see the tagline. And I see Baroque and I don't like that idea or I don't understand it, that's going to immediately push me away from the game.
Yeah.
Where otherwise I might have enjoyed it. So the fact it's in the tagline is the first thing you see is still important, even if it's the only time you see it.
Change it to decadent then.
Yeah, because how many people know what Baroque is. Because I said, is it me who's out of touch that I don't?
I
haven't
don't
heard
know
this
it
word?
either. I translated Baroque to wigs.
I just assumed everyone did.
No.
I'm aware
no.
of it as a classical music genre, and even then, not by a lot. But I know that
I'd be aware of it in general style.
Sadly, sadly, that's one area my overexpensive education failed to prepare me.
You never went to Versailles.
Yeah.
But it's
Mhm.
I think so definitely it's like for instance Purple, when we were doing the second game and I was drawing the cards for the tarot. In your case, because you knew like a lot about tarot, you found it a lot easier to base things on its interpretations.
Mhm.
Whereas I didn't, and I tended to base them on the images.
I
Mhm.
just based them on the images mostly.
Yeah. So I think coming from a perspective of someone that knows none of it is better than coming from perspective of someone that knows it.
Mm.
So I think replacing it with Decadent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying you're not. I'm just sort of I guess because I understand like Baroque was something you're quite attached to. I'm trying to ease the wound a little bit.
Yeah. we are putting down your baby. We're taking them outside.
It's fine. Like decadent worked.
Yeah.
The reason I went for Baroque is because it was the word that very like the best described like the image that was in my head when I was trying to sell that tagline.
Mm.
No, definitely.
Don't know about you, but whenever I hear Baroque now, I imagine Eddie Redmayne from Jupiter Ascending.
I mean, who
Yeah.
shouldn't do that? Because it was a look.
Yeah.
A strong look. Goodness me.
But yes, so we have a couple of changes to make.
Mm.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
This game needs more Eddie Redmayne now.
Yes. We should speak to him. Which one of us is friends with?
Mm-hmm. I'm sure I can call some people in the ad break.
So I think we are going to indeed take an ad break now. And when we come back, it will be community news and ideas for the next one. See you guys then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Welcome back to